Hello, my name is ADELE TUTTER, and I'm the director of the Psychoanalytic Studies program here at Columbia. Welcome to the last of our special programs for this academic year. The PSP is part of the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society in the Graduate School of the Arts and Sciences at Columbia University. We offer a certificate in psychoanalytic studies to students in the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Our purpose is to raise awareness of the fruitful interface between psychoanalytic thought, the fine arts, the humanities, and the social sciences, and to raise awareness of the relevance of psychoanalysis today in the academy, but also in the world in which we live. I am more than honored to introduce both of our speakers today, and I'll introduce both of them so that we don't have to interrupt the program. Professor Mary Bergstein is Emerita professor in the history of art and visual culture at the Rhode Island School of Design. Professor Bergstein's publications include In Looking Back, One Learns to See, Marcel Proust and Photography, and The Sculpture of Nani de Banco, as well as numerous articles, reviews, and exhibition catalog essays. But it is her book, Mirrors of Memory, Freud, Photography, and the History of Art, winner of the American Psychoanalytic Association Book Prize, that is best known to us analysts. This book builds a compelling case for the importance of visual culture, and in particular, photographic imagery, in the development of Freud's theorizing. Mirrors of Memory has been described by one critic as a paragon in the annals of interdisciplinary scholarship. One could say the same thing about its author. She is one of the very few people I know who I can count on half of one hand, whose work bridges academic scholarship and psychoanalytic theory with equal rigor, evident mastery of both. Her inquiry is both broad and deep, and traces meaningful connections across diverse eras from antiquity to the present day. Her current book project is Science and Eros, Visual Culture in Freud's Vienna. I am thrilled to have her here with us in person and remotely to talk about costumes of nudity. Our discussant today is Dr. SUSIE ORBACH, psychoanalyst, writer, activist, and social critic. Dr. ORBACH was formerly a visiting professor at the London School of Economics and is now a visiting scholar at Hertford College in Oxford. One of the most preeminent feminist voices within psychoanalysis, Dr. ORBACH is the author of many books, including the foundational feminist text, Fat is a Feminist Issue, which was recently updated and re-released. Bodies, another book named Bodies, and more recently, In Therapy, The Unfolding Story. She still contributes to The Guardian, where she was a longtime columnist. Dr. ORBACH is the co-founder of the Women's Therapy Center in London and the Women's Therapy Center Institute in New York. She is also the founder of anybodyuk.org, a local global organization dedicated to fighting body hatred. Dr. ORBACH is the recipient of the first Lifetime Achievement Award for Psychoanalysis given by the British Psychoanalytical Society. She has sat on expert advisory panels for the British government, and in 2019 was named a Fellow of the Royal Society for Literature. We are really so fortunate to have you both of you to speak to us here in New York. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mary.
Okay. I don't know if we want the lights dimmer, or is that going to be possible? Or... That's better. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Adele. Thank you for inviting me here, and thank you for that nice introduction. If nudity is an absolute state, it is nevertheless culturally complex in its various guises. The false nudity constructed in photographs like this one was an invention of modern technology. These images were made possible by advances in commercial textile design and production, as well as commercial photography. Okay. Now, SUSIE ORBACH, our friend, has emphasized that among nudes, there has never been a natural body. She stated that there have only been bodies that are shaped by their social and cultural designation, and that bodies are always the expression of a specific period, geography, sexual, religious, and cultural place. Now, Susie's comments are true for their living bodies, which are her stock and trade, which are the most important bodies, right? But at the same time, it's especially true for bodies in representation, like the ones we're going to be looking at today. And this is Manet's Olympia that you're seeing here. And it's one of the most famous nudes, I think, in the history of art. And even if I was to show you just this right-hand detail, you'd probably all recognize it as one of the most famous and outrageous nudes in art history. You'll also notice that the whiteness of the model is emphasized by the very dark skin of her companion. During the first phases of industrial capitalism, machine knitted stockings became an established industry in Europe and the United States. A refined fabric called stockinet was produced by knitting machines using silk or fine wool for use in hosiery and lingerie. And here you're seeing a pair of hose with the owner's initials picked out. They look like LR to me. I don't know what they are, but you can see it was like crocheted into the fabric and they belong to a particular person. Now, stockinet was a stretchy textile that also had applications in fashion, doll making, and bandaging, especially after the First World War. This camisole that you're seeing here is very attractive. Many of us would like to buy this right now in a department store if you found it, but it's about 125 years old. And it's in the Museum of Art at the Rhode Island School of Design, which has an extensive collection of textiles and costumes. Here now is a photograph from 1900 of the American socialite Clara Ward, about whom more later. She's wearing a kind of second skin or external silk membrane. And here the stockinet body stocking provides the fiction of a white marble-like finish on a human body, as if she's a work of sculpture. This whiteness is further enhanced by monochrome photography, these photographs were widely distributed through cabinet prints and postcards at the time. Around 1900, such pictures further mystified the woman's body in visual culture. It's part of the mystification of the woman's body, producing a fantasy woman for modern times. And you may notice that in this particular, this is from 1900s by Reutlinger, who was a commercial photographer in Paris. And you can see that Clara Ward doesn't look all that comfortable in it because it's too small for her. So her flesh is a little bit suffocated by the body stocking. And it fits her so tightly as to almost prohibit movement. You can't really imagine her getting up and moving around. So she's tightly encased in that body stocking there. Body stocking was typically undergirded by corsetry and padding, giving the illusion of nudity without revealing the model's body or skin. This is Clara Ward again. The stockinet apparel generalized and idealized the individual woman's body, covering her wrinkles, nipples, body hair, and physical imperfections, creating what has been described as an ideal sexual surface. Now, the beholder of images like this was offered the fantasy of a full nudity, satisfying the gaze of what was a socially sanctioned scopophilia. In other words, everybody wanted to look at nudes, and here it was. Now, beholder, who do I mean by the beholder? Certainly not people like us. When I talk about the beholder, I'm speaking of the beholder of over a century ago. And so that's just very important to keep in mind. So let's try to imagine the beholder's share at the turn of the 20th century to kind of get into the swing of things. This costume was neither underwear nor proper apparel. The close-fitting body stocking also covered and smoothed the edges the edges of the corsets and padded tights worn to further shape the body. And here's a pair of padded tights. You can see they're padded with kind of sheepskin, sheep wool. And so curves were enhanced or invented by both compressing and padding flesh beneath. Now, let's get into the photographic faux nude by way of the American socialite Clara Ward again, who became the Princess of Chimay. Here she is, an American heiress whose large fortune came from industrialization, namely shipping and lumber industries in Michigan. Clara married the Belgian Prince Joseph de Riquet, and you can see him there in his natty attire and everything. And he was the Prince of Caraman Chimay. She married him in 1889 at the age of 16. And for context, for historical context here, you might want to remember that Prince Joseph was a cousin of King Leopold II, the genocidal ruler of the so-called Belgian Congo. Now, Clara, known to her fellow Americans as Clara, Princess of Chimay, and here's the castle at Chimay, which is a kind of forbidding looking place. Like, I can't imagine, leaving Paris or something like that, or even leaving New York or something like that. But anyway, she made a spectacle of herself throughout Europe, mostly as an insoumise who presented herself in scandalous costumes. So born in Detroit, Clara bought the title of princess with her immense dowry. I said it was from the lumber and shipping industries in Michigan. And but never really adjusted to life at the Chateau de Chimay, as you see it there. Now it's fixed up. I should, full disclosure, I should tell you that now the Chateau of Chimay is fixed up as a kind of tourist attraction, but it looks very grim back then, and I can't imagine it's that much nicer now. So, born in Detroit, Clara bought the title of princess with her dowry, and she was reported to have been restless and bored with her emotionally distant husband while living at Chimay with him. A typical American, she spoke too loudly and wore too much makeup, and had herself photographed way too much. Now, Clara lived in the cold and forbidding Chateau de Chimay, as you see it there, with a rather cold and forbidding husband, Prince Joseph. Now, it's hard to imagine scampering around the Chateau de Chimay wearing a body stocking, which may be one reason that the marriage was not a happy one. Anyway, they divorced. Clara was also a fond acquaintance of Marcel Proust, our good old friend Proust, right? You feel more relaxed just to look at him, right? And may have been a model for the scandalously arriviste character Odette de Crécy in Proust's novel In Search of Lost Time. Here is one of the most exquisite women of the turn of the century in France. She is Madame Greffule, Clara Ward's sister-in-law. She's very elegantly attired, and she had a social composition of being the most exquisite and, sort of like a composed creature on the planet. And she considered her brother Joseph's wife a savage not only for her North American origins, but for her louche appearance and behavior as well. But Elizabeth Greffule was in many photographs herself. She also had a career, a kind of performance career in photography. And she modeled exquisite poses and very refined clothing for photographers such as Paul Nadar, who made this photograph. Paul Nadar was the great Nadar's nephew. Here she's wearing the famous lily dress by Worth, as seen in the mirror. And the dress and the photograph both come from about 1896. So you can see the mirror. Oh, by the way, does everyone know what that kind of mirror is called? That style of mirror? It's called a Psyche mirror, so it's particularly resonant for us this evening. And if you remember the case history of Anna O, for example, remember she was hallucinating death heads in a mirror. And so I don't really know what was in Sigmund Pappenheim's bedroom, but there probably was something like this. I don't quite remember whether there was or not. Anyway, Bertha Pappenheim was the real NO, and Sigmund Pappenheim was her father, and his fortune came from the grain industry, like a lot of other Jewish people in the Austrian Empire. Okay, so here's the Psyche mirror again, just so you can identify it when you see it. The narcissistic and erotic values of nudity and costumes via the camera's lens was a purposeful method of looking and being looked at. So any of these mirrors would have been very common during the time that Freud was treating NO. Now, mirrors too are transformative objects. In interior space, they make the familiar look strange. And you've probably had that experience within your own homes. You look in the mirror and what, that's my room? No, it doesn't look like it. Otto Rank, in his study of the doppelganger, stated that one of the most uncanny experiences anyone could have was to suddenly accidentally catch sight of one's reflection in a mirror. And he said that he put that into print in 1914. So we're all hovering right around the same time period here. Now here's Clara Ward as Demeter. And this is a particularly interesting artifact to me because, well, photographs, of course, were already cathected objects as surrogates for their primary reference, right? So here's Clara Ward dressed as a goddess, a fertility goddess, right? In the superstitious acts of sympathetic magic around 1900, photographs were kissed, defaced, or burned, as they still may be in 2023. Now here's a photo postcard of Clara Ward as the Greek fertility goddess Ceres. It's very classical. Okay, you want a locus classicus? There you are, right? But at a certain point, someone scribbled some insulting things about her on it with a pen using blue ink. So this artifact really fascinated me because it was a kind of palimpsest. Like first, then she wants to see herself this way, or somebody wants to portray her this way. Then they write all sorts of insulting things about her directly on the photograph. By 1898, Clara had divorced Prince Joseph and married her lover, the Romani violinist Rigo Bianchi, with whom she traveled the world. And there they are. The princess then engaged in life as a full-time performance artist. She appeared on stage in sculptural poses at such venues as the Folies Bergère and Moulin Rouge in Paris. And here she is playing around in the photographer's studio. That's all I can call it. So these are excuse me, commercial photographs that were made, you know, and you can find them anywhere. I found a lot of these in the thrift shop on Cape Cod, for example, these postcards. Nobody wants them, of course. And so it's pretty easy to find them even these days. So in one erotic image of Clara and Rigo, he's lying down, fully recumbent, fully dressed in a suit and tie, without his violin, while she dances over him in a body stocking. She's crowned with an oversized paper flower at her forehead, as if in triumph. So she plays the victor and he the sexually vanquished in this scenario, as far as we can tell. The way her stockinged foot, and you can see it, I don't have a pointer, but you can see it over his shoulder. It's just flexed over his shoulder. Is flexed neatly over Yanshi's shoulder in this picture, suggesting the commonly used technique of photomontage, just to introduce one technical aspect of these works. The image at the left of this group seems to represent an erotic circus act, more scandalous because of her nude body stocking torso, contrasting his fully clothed figure. In a little postcard over at the right, which you see there, and that was certainly found in something I found in some secondhand store. Yanshi is snuggled up to Clara from a kneeling position on the floor, coming under the protection of her blanket or cloak, rendering the woman dominant but kindly toward her lover. In photography, as in live performance, Clara Ward used the violinist as a prop. She was divorced again by 1904, though, and her subsequent third and fourth marriages were, like the first, short-lived and very colorful. Tara Ward undertook various roles as a false nude, including classical personifications. And so here you see her in one photo as a personification of truth. And you can see her attribute is a mirror and she holds it up. It's ridiculous, right? So she's holding up this hand mirror, that's truth. And then she's also personifying light itself, a certain kind of light, photographic light, in this other personification. And her iconographic attribute there is a magnesium flash. I think there's something coming, kind of covering that up, but if you could see it better, you'd see that she.
Let's put an X on that.
Oh, wait, let me see.
Yeah,
Like that?
yes.
Okay, you still can't see it very well, but what she's holding up is a magnesium flash. So she might have found it on the floor of the studio right before they started photographing or one thing or another, but it's very self-referential here, right? Those are the tools of her trade and the tools of this photographer's trade, whoever it was. I don't know who the photographer was in this case. So maybe she found the magnesium flash on the floor just before the photograph was taken, but in any case, it's very self-referential, to say the least. Clara Ward became one of the most scandalous women of the Belle Epoque, and she fostered that reputation by fashioning herself as a performer, a photographer's model, and a would-be demi-mondaine. In her personal iconography, Clara was famous for being famous. She didn't really have any particular talent that she excelled in or anything like that, as far as I know. She burned bright in her social life and performance. Cabinet prints and postcards of photographs of Clara in these lavish disguises of nudity circulated to a wide public throughout Europe and the Americas. And like I said, it's still possible to find these photographs in a thrift shop, and like I found some of these at a secondhand store in Cape Cod, or you can find them around any place that they sell used photographs or things like that. Doesn't advance. Okay, thanks. Thank you. Now here I want to finally show you a detail of Frine before the Areopagus in the painting by Jean-Léon Gérôme. And you're seeing a detail of it there at the left, I should say. And so that is Frine when she was accused by this council of men for being too visible as a woman. And then you can see that one of the judges is, or her lawyer, I should say, is taking her clothes off and letting her stand there nude. And you can see that her body is, for one thing, extremely white and extremely bright. What's intriguing here is that Gérôme's figure of Frine was itself based on a photograph made by Nadar, the great Nadar, for the painter. So he purchased this photograph from Nadar, who was, of course, the uncle of Paul Nadar. The Nadars were several. And so there you have her as the great Nadar's nude photograph of Mariette, which is one of the first nude photographs he made. And it's very striking. I don't know why it's hardly people ever study it, but it's very striking. And it was used for producing that particular painting. So here it is. This photograph was made by the great Nadar for the painter Gérôme while he was working on his painting of Frine before her judges. Now, using Nadar's photograph as a model, Gérôme depicted the moment in antiquity that I just showed you, where the courtesan is disrobed by her lawyer, unveiled by her lawyer. And she holds her arm to her face to avoid eye contact from the gaze of the jurors. But the jurors, you're familiar with the huge painting, are so deeply stirred by the sight of her beauty that they award her freedom. Okay, so she's no longer under arrest for being too flashy or too beautiful. Nadar's female nude right here communicates porous vulnerability and capacity for deterioration by showing nipples, body hair, and wrinkled knees, even dirty feet. No body stocking here and none required. Now, Nadar's model, Marie-Christine Leroux, called Mariette, and you can see, I think I have that up on, yeah. Mariette was a well-known professional artist model working in the ateliers of Paris, like her classical antecedent Frine was in ancient Greece. Leroux's career ended unfortunately in 1863 when she drowned in a shipwreck on the way to Algiers. But there she is when she was still -1. Okay. Classicism was an elastic concept in figurative art of the 20th century, especially when applied to the female nude and photography. The living model in this picture by Johann Schwarzer is implicitly compared to a figure from a classical legend, namely Frine, and you see the sculptured Frine off by her side. There were plenty of sculptures of Frine mechanically reproduced and made by all sorts of sculptors, including the most academic of sculptors. And Frine was mechanically reproduced and sculptured too, as you see, and duly photographed. So there you have the living woman with her classical counterpart, her sculptured counterpart. Photographs I'm presenting here can be seen as representations of bodies characterized by sets of contradictions. The women are simultaneously classical and modern, monumental and ghostly, erotic and sexless, evocative and deadpan to the same extent. The body stocking casts a naked female body as both spectral and beyond deterioration. These uncanny conditions produced a conundrum for the beholder. And again, I'm talking about the beholder back then, not for us, who saw the idealized female nude as a manufactured phantasm, at once sexy and sterile. Remember, I'm talking about the beholder of at least a century ago. The body stocking and Clara's trademark in self-stage was Clara's trademark in self-staging throughout her celebrity. In one of the most effective of such poses, issued in postcard format, her skin is compressed to a marmoreal finish by the stockinet attire. Her costume of nudity is, oh wait, I wanted to, sorry. Oh, there she is, okay. Sorry, I'd have to straighten this out. That was her trademark, was wearing that body costume and being photographed in it. Her skin is compressed to this marmoreal finish by what she's wearing. And her costume of nudity is dramatized by the upward gaze of heavily made up eyes. And I think here in this particular representation, her eyes are tattooed with that makeup. So she was, and you can see she has another tattoo around one of her arms. And so she was tattooed, we believe, well, we know, by Tom Riley, who was an American, well, he was British, but he worked out of New York as a tattoo artist. And he was very, very, well, he was very, very popular and did a lot of different kinds of tattooing, including his specialty cosmetic tattooing of the eyes and the cheeks and stuff like that. Jerome painted his Frine luminous and white. She's like a work of classical sculpture brought to life. And here I'm showing you that painted figure next to this photograph of, these are naked people dusted in talcum powder. And so they were powdered. And they're shown as the surface of, these are postcards are very easy to come by. They're like everywhere. And they're called lavender marble, living marbles. And you can see that what they're dressed in is powder. powder was used to render the bodies of the women and men who were fixed as these were. They probably were in a show that's kind of spun around. They were on a Lazy Susan, kind of spinning around in front of the public. And they were fixed in place on pedestals like sculpture. And they too were super white, right? You can see how that, don't you see how that works here? As white as Carrara marble. Now, here's a scene from one of the Saturn films. And the Saturn films, this, for those of you who, have you ever heard of the Saturn films before? Well, they were these kind of erotic comedies that were made in the first decade of the 20th century. They were very popular. And it was only really the, well, it was only really the First World War and the fact that some of these people were killed that ended the Lavender Marmore series, as you see them here. And here you see one of the, this is a still from one of the sequences of the living statues. And what you're seeing here is a bunch of Viennese men. I think that guy in the front is the filmmaker, who unfortunately died in World War I in the East, on the Eastern Front. But anyway, he and these other guys are admiring this woman dressed only in powder. And she will soon, the viewer here in this still is seeing these men who have been admiring her from a distance, not from a distance, from close up, and poking and prodding her to their heart's content, thinking that she's not knowing whether she's alive or she's a statue. And the Saturn films, what happens next is she comes to life, she pounces down, jumps to the floor, and she absolutely scares the wits out of all those clever voyeurs that are watching her. They didn't know whether she was real. So these are these erotic comedies that were playing in Vienna around 1910, and I recommend them, and they have them at the Neue Galerie here in New York, if you ever want to go see them there. And you can buy them in the Neue Galerie bookstore, I think. So if you're at all interested, you can buy them there, I think. Okay. At the turn of the 20th century, Henry Havelock Ellis wrote about the psychology of skin in terms of sexual attraction. Havelock Ellis stated that snow, alabaster, ivory, milk, and cream were all called in as similes for women's skin. That is to say that a premium on whiteness and smoothness was placed on a European woman's desirability. The stockinet body stocking helped construct the fiction of a marmoreal whiteness and the photographic representation of nudity. But human skin is also a liminal zone, a boundary between the self and other, between a person's interior and the outside world. Now, according to the psychoanalyst, our good friend Didier Ancieux, the skin functions to shape the body and to contain the ego. I'm not sure whether I agree with that, but this has been, he's been an authority on this topic for a long time. He's dead now. In terms of the unconscious, skin is able to speak. Phenomena such as pallor, blushing, congestion, tingling, swelling, and hives were among the skin symptoms of hysteria identified by Dr. Thomas Saville in the Lancet of 1904. The Lancet was the medical journal in England. Such hysterical conditions of the skin, quote unquote, rendered the female body strange, anti-classical, and unnatural. And actually, you don't have to be hysterical to come down with hives that are psycho-induced. I can testify to that on my own, and it's not a hysterical reaction; it's an emotional reaction, probably. Anyway, hives are typically psycho-induced. In Vienna, at the same time, Sigmund Freud was thinking about skin as the erotogenic zone par excellence, identifying it as an area of sexual attraction that invited the same sense of touch as well as scopophilia. In our time, I mean, really in our times, Skin has been recognized by dermatologists as what they call the most appropriate site for the somatic transformation of subjective psychological contents. Like a cinematic screen, a person's skin displays projection of anxiety, age, injury, or illness. Likewise, the stockinet body stockings provided a fictional, artificial blank skin for the projection of the viewer's fantasies. In Bodies That Matter of 2011, Judith Butler links the materiality of the body to the performativity of gender. How, Butler asks, does a category of sex figure within such a relationship? Butler commented that as much as the body stocking was a disguise of sorts, it materialized the female body into a kind of a matrix, a schema, a matrix. A woman in a body stocking was therefore a sort of caricature of the heterosexual norm and its inevitably misogynistic consequences. And that's the truth in its inevitably misogynistic consequences in theatrical or photographic representation. So a second skin over the underscaffolding of padded tights and corsetry, Butler maintained, was not so much a prosthesis, but rather a schema. Accepting Butler's proposition, I would contend that it was only the craft of photography with its sfumato effects that made the illusion whole. In the schema of the female nude, whiteness was very important too, and I keep emphasizing that. This is a, where are we here? We're around 1900, but we've looked at things that were from 1860s as well. Rice powder also made a uniform shiny white surface on the body. But Charles Baudelaire wrote about powder in The Painter of Modern Life. Let me see if I can go back to that. Baudelaire wrote about it in The Painter of Modern Life in 1863. Anyone can see, he said, that the use of rice powder is successfully designated to rid the complexion of those blemishes that nature has outrageously strewn there, and thus to create an abstract unity in color and texture of the skin, a unity which, like that produced by the legs of a dancer, immediately approximates the human being to the statue, that is, to something superior and divine. Unlike powder, however, which marbleized the body in its existing shape, stockinet allowed the model's flesh itself to be sculptured by concealing the presence of undergarments, like those padded tights we saw before. The effect is furthered by the use of photography, muffling and glossing the ensemble seamlessly into a photographic visual field. Like stone sculpture, long associated with death and eternity, representations like this one produce a flickering across boundaries between life and death. In performance, as well as photography, the nearly invisible stockinet garment played between the realms of inanimate sculpture and living flesh, evoking a mood that either Ernst, Jentsch, or Sigmund Freud might have considered uncanny. Nude or clothed, dead or alive, natural or artificial. These images, I would contend, created a fantasy that had a perplexing effect on the viewers around the turn of the 20th century. Now, stone sculpture is one thing, but silk is something else. The idea of encasing the body in a sort of stocking can also be regarded as a fetish in the psychoanalytic meaning of the word. And here I'm showing you two topical postcards from my own collection of these kinds of things. And the one you see at the left is from Berlin. It's oh yeah, that's by Stieglitz, who was born actually in Hoboken, New Jersey, but went back to work in Berlin when his parents came. And so you see a French illustration at the right and a German at the left. Now, one of the things about that postcard at the left is that it's a real boon for people who study costume history, again, like all those textiles and garments in the RISD Museum. You can see that she's got a whole variety of garments on, or putting on, or just taken off. And you can really, from that photograph, you can know what was ideally under a woman's dress at that point in time. And the one at the right is a little different because the stockings are in bad shape and they're black. But they're both fetishizing the stocking, I would maintain. So Freud wrote of fetishism in terms of inanimate things, body parts or particular conditions, as substitutions or stand-ins for the living sexual object. Photographs themselves were already looked at and pored over frequently and repeatedly as captivating objects, assuming the condition of fetishes themselves. Triumphantly posed Clara Ward in a body stocking we see instead makes a certain claim, no matter how dimly, to classical transcendence. Pasted down to a dark chiaroscuro ground, it creates a generalized yet time-specific ideal image of the female nude. She has no need to cover her face in shame or modesty. She's like Freeney, but she doesn't cover her face. Our current critique might be incited by an awareness of how the body stocking caricatures the female heterosexual ideal and its misogynistic implications. And so here I have a few words written up there too, in case anybody was interested. The body stocking forecloses penetrability and impregnation. It aspires to the state of classical statuary. The fact that a woman is cross-dressed in a state of womanly masquerade makes us remember Joan Riviere and Judith Butler both. And so, so it rejects biological substance, the stockinet, body stocking. The body stocking presented the female nude as quasi-classical, hiding the biological processes of reproduction and aging, all the while maintaining a carnivalesque presentation of an actress, a dancer, or a prostitute. What we have here is a rebellious, narcissistic woman in a sleek disguise. There is an emphasis on the outside skin. Everything's about the skin with absolutely no regard for the interior state of mind of that person, unless you can see that in her eyes, but the eyes are tattooed anyway, so it's hard to see. Feminist theorists from Joan Riviere to Judith Butler permit us to see these models, Clara and others, as women cross-dressed as women, in a state of womanly masquerade that typically suppresses body hair, sex organs, and aging. Like I said, the body stocking forecloses penetrability and impregnation. And yet its aspiration to the condition of classical statuary are pretty much annulled in a certain way by nudity as a theatrical costume. Clara Ward is a carnivalesque figure who is transgressive and makes herself a spectacle of sex. But at the same time, she is submissive, vulnerable to aggression, a caricature of femininity, and a figure of what Mary Rousseau termed the female grotesque in 1994. The rather schizoid cognitive slippage of body exposure and containment, we were talking about containment before, containment provided by the body stocking and strengthened by the photograph, which smooths over the stitched together nature of the body stocking and smooths over the nature of the whole fantasy, visual fantasy. The woman is simultaneously covered and exposed. A contradiction in terms that, as I have just argued, can be disturbing or even uncanny. In Clara Ward's self-imaging, the body stocking plays a role in what Roland Barthes referred to as the whole complex game of undergarments, garments, and overgarments, and their complicated relation to social acceptability or scandal. These pictures address issues of what is constrained, prohibited, tolerated, or allowed. These are things that Barthes wrote about. The body stocking is a second skin over the padded corsetry and tights that constrain the flesh to a certain firmness and whiteness, a costume of classical purity as well as sexual allure. But it was the photographer's medium that produce the illusion of idealized sculptural nudity in replicable photographic representation. The seamlessness of the body stocking, where the presence of undergarments was all but invisible, was cooked to perfection, as it were, in the photographer's laboratory. The female nude was thus further mystified or obscured, and its representation made durable by reproducibility. The combined forces of stockinet technology and the transformative power of photography in attracting the gaze simultaneously represses and unleashes a woman's desire to show herself and the beholder's desire to look. In conclusion, I think we can agree that owing to mechanized textile production, an industrial modernized skin ego was created in the photographer's studio and dispersed to the world in photographic prints. Thanks.
Oh, do you want me to be here?
Yes.
I think I might have to stand because that's what I'm used to doing when I talk.
Oh, yeah. Would you like to start?
I don't even need to stand, but I just used to standing.
Okay.
First, I want to say how delighted I am to have been invited to think about Mary's work, and it's most interesting and engaging to me. And I have a whole set of thoughts that I've just had looking at the pictures projected now. So maybe they'll come up, not in these remarks, but when we all have a conversation. And I love seeing this precursor to spandex and the control of women's bodies, which happened in the 80s in a particular form. I must also say that I'm not trained at all in looking at art. I'm a psychoanalyst who's occasionally written about images, some by artists, notably the British sculptor Mark Gwynne and Francis Aviva Blaine, the painter. But my responses really are from a totally untrained eye. My eye is on the face and the body of the analysand, the person or people who come into my consulting room. These are the faces and bodies that move. They're not held in a frame. The people I see sit on a sofa or a chair. I greet them outside my room. I do not use a couch in the manner of Freud. My interest is in the person, but also in the body of the person, the moving, sweating, easy, uneasy, matched, mismatched body. That is what fascinates me. And I can't therefore use the architecture of the room in the way that Freud did. Over the years, my responses to the bodies in the room have intrigued and sometimes perplexed me. They've led me to think about the instability of the body and the body's search for recognition, for acceptance, and sometimes the desperation to convey how repulsive the body feels. Now, psychotherapists and analysts of all denominations, including body therapists, are primarily interested in the body as a truth about the psyche. They're not really interested in the body qua body. The troubled psyche comes to therapy to be treated, so to speak, even if there's a body symptom. By engaging with what troubles the patient, the psychic structure is stretched and reordered to enable the individual to live more comfortably from within and from themselves. The impact of the analysand's mind and emotions on the analyst's sense of self is what enables me, or the therapist, to understand and help the analysand to integrate what's split off, what's discarded, what's disavowed. So why am I telling you this when we're looking at these images? Surely it's a strange way to spend a day when the impact of the other is so present on one's personal subjectivity. And yet that is what we do. When it comes to bodies, I've had the experience of feeling utterly out of sorts in a session, as though I were covered in dandruff or itching. A session before or after, I felt at ease and unaware of my physical self. I felt like a grandma with a huge lap when I was barely a mother. I felt like a purring pussycat within a session. The variety of ways that I have come to feel about my body within a session has then led me to argue that there's no such thing as a body. A body is an outcome of relationship, usually between the maternal figure and the growing child. And folded into the developing body of the child are the internalized social mores, the classed and raced and geographic locations of the mothering subject, which convey, not in a purposeful way, but as a matter of course, the cultural story of the body in that social and psychological context, and what is allowed to the developing infant, to the infant and the developing child. The gendered stories sit next to social expectations, and the unconscious transmission of the body story of the maternal person, which will inevitably be conveyed and projected onto the body of the developing infant. And I certainly can talk about that as a mother myself and the very different projections I had onto my children's bodies when I was completely determined not to see them in gender terms. Our time, late capitalism that is, demands that bodies are for performance. More about that in a minute. In the time that Mary's telling us of the faux nude, most bodies were engaged in manual labor, certainly in Europe and certainly in the UK. This labor was rapidly occurring in the factory. You may have heard of the famous match girls strike in 1988 in Britain against the ingestion of the dangerous phosphorus. But men and women also worked in the fields and in the households of the growing middle classes, for whom, as a rising middle class, leisure was increasing. Flower Ward's time coincides with not just the beginning of photography and technical lighting, but of mass fashion and the invention of the department store to serve the women of the expanding leisured bourgeoisie. As the extracted wealth of the British colonies and slave trade poured prosperity into these privileged classes in Britain and the United States, and Belgium, obviously, and Spain, etc., we see the industrialization of production and the development of new fabrics for disguise, support, and concealment, as Mary has said. With it, there is the development of the bourgeois wife as decorative, and the department store as this place to signal what a woman should own and display. It was also a place of public consorting for women. As often, art leads the way. A feature of the North American department store was their class stratification, the bargain basement, the moderately priced, the designer rooms, all under one enormous roof. I remember being bewildered when I first came to New York in the late 60s and couldn't find a correct department store for me. In England, the department store itself was classified by class. So there was Harrods for the wealthy and the upper middle classes, and John Lewis for the middle classes and the aspiring working classes. In Harrods then, the beautifully monogrammed initials, which completely captivate me in your slides, would have been offered to the mistress of the house to designate ownership and privacy. Now those kind of monograms must compete against the branding of the fashion houses, whose logos designate ownership again in class terms. Purses or scarves for working class women. You can buy a Pierre Cardin scarf. Haute couture clothing for the really wealthy. Handbags for the aspiring. Now displays about belonging. And as I think of Mary's title, Faux Nudes, I think of our time as a time of faux belonging. by which I mean it's not possible to belong because we're always being dispossessed. Display, mass fashion, and pose dominate our visual field and the bodies we're able to inhabit and create. The mirror that Mary shows is the site of the pose. Today, young girls as young as 3 know how to do it. They know that the body is fictive. Just a year after toddlerhood and well before puberty, they're primed for notions of transformation and showing off, the concealing and displaying. The cosmetic surgery apps pumped at little girls ensure that they will have bodies they know can and should be remodeled. The boys aspire to show 6-packs, and I'm talking about 6-year-old boys. And both girls and boys, not through concealing stocking and padding, but through slicing, injecting, and ingesting, as well as reshaping the actual materiality of their flesh. That is what they grow up learning they will be able to do. As teens, on Insta or TikTok, they know about face enhancement, how to make a celebrity face or a Barbie face. They know that face and body are themselves camouflage, a feature of the war on their bodies. They use the mirror to see whether they pass. The mirror has a regulating purpose. Do I make it? Dare we approve of what we see? Can we live with what we see? But the mirrors are perplexing. They can only give a static view of self and a composed view in which there is a mirror face and a mirror stance. And what we see in the mirror reflects not just the lighting, but the inner eye and the inner judgment. As John Berger, writing in the 1970s, said, and he was writing about women, but I would also say now add he and they, all of us, even us old ones, see how we will be seen in the light of an inner eye formed by criticism. How can the poser reproduce a version of femininity, of masculinity, of the non-binary that conforms when the subject has come to see their body as abject, as not good, and as failing? In the mirror is the search for concealment, the attempt to make sure one passes in who one is going as. I think Mary's work gives us a historic background to the conceits of today, where now the clothing and cosmetic industries sell ever-increasing amounts of goods to ever-increasing markets. Children, men, those cultures entering modernity through the production of faux bodies. To walk through a department store today is to walk through endless makeup counters, offering tips and advice to render us either natural looking, skin whitened, or carnivalesque. We often think of these industries as small, but L'Oreal, who just touted its results as having a growth rate of 21% and an earning per share of 27.6%, provides the Bettencourt family with its enormous wealth. Between Bettencourt, Bernard Arnault, head of LVMH, and Amancio Ortega, boss of Zara, who's third on the Forbes list, you have the 3 richest families in Europe. No surprise then that they contribute so generously to the rebuilding of Notre Dame, as though to cloak themselves in the cathedral of spirituality, another concealment. And yet around the corner from the Seine, the booths between the bridges sell postcards not dissimilar to those Mary has shown us. The photographer's studio is the site of display of the search for a way to represent self, of respectability and pornography and titillation. I have a recent postcard bought from these booths. I'm absolutely fascinated, and I don't know what fascinates me about them. It's designed to titillate at a time when bodies for sexual stimulation are available on our phones. So what are those postcards still doing? Not just photographed bodies, moving bodies, bodies doing sex. We can get all of that on our phone, apparently. Body signaling availability. On OnlyFans, which is a website which you can subscribe to a particular person on, Bodies of all shapes, sizes, and ages will perform for the individual customer. Interestingly, Nadia Talakonikova of Pussy Riot fame, who took on Putin, finds that a way for her to make a living. She is said to embrace the dominatrix and BDSM position because it gives women power. And to her inheritors. I'm not sure that Mary would support this idea, but Josephine Baker, who played at the Folies Bergère 10 years after Clara Ward's death, decorated nudity as opposed to faux nudity when she wore a skirt made of bananas. I think it's a real difference. Although I have questions about bananas. Was this a class and race comment? Was this more openly sexual? Had Clara opened up something more permissible about the female body? If we go along with Judith Butler's idea that we're always looking and performing women's bodies, maybe what we're performing is the ability to be anything for anyone. The rub is, how can a woman's body be a place of embodiment for the woman herself? The other thing that these slides made me think about is Mary's brief mention of sex as the liminal space between inner and outer. For Freud, skin was a sexual signal. Certainly my daughter's cohort at 12 were waxing and plucking as a way of acknowledging something to do with the markers of sexual awakening. A marker emphasized by the beauty salon and the woman beauticians attending to their pubic hair. I often think of how today the women in the salons prepare the next generation by stripping any trace of body hair away. For my generation, to have had underarm hair and a bush, not that we had that word then, was the sexual call that proclaimed we were no longer pre-adolescent, but that we were expectant. But of course, the surface of the skin is considerably more than a surface, and it is often more than sexual. For psychoanalysts, it's a container and communication. The question for me is what the skin tells us, and what troubled skin, weeping skin, blushing skin, raw skin alerts us to at the psyche and the somatic level. I think of blushing as actually, and the hiding of the arm in the slide that you show as being really quite touching, and the shyness of it. There's shyness and shame and interest and expectation. It's not just one thing. I kind of like it. So the question is are these things communications about the psyche, as in a person who has eczema, alerting to us that her need for soothing and an inability to settle? And this is a very off the shelf type of interpretation. Or is it an indicator of a troubled body that hasn't been well received and feels the rawness of uncontainment? By contrast, the skin that Clara has woven for her, the faux nude, is there to indicate a site of perfection and of yet also of privacy. I'm showing and I'm not showing. And in that is the sexual tease, the sets of gestures given to women historically through the pose, then later by the movies, and now in videos of provocation. What women today face is how to absorb a body untainted by the bodies that raise her, when all around is a clash between the glorification, the adoration, and the worship on one side, and the assault, violence, and denigration of the female form on the other. It's a hard place to live. Neither childhood or old age are exempt from vilification and the demand to transform. In my practice, I have noticed women coming in with faces that are plumped or changed, or of all kinds of ages, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and am I supposed to comment on it? Am I not supposed to comment on it? It's like the donning of a new face. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, we mere mortals have to try and live from our bodies. Thank you, Mary.
Pleasure.
Sure. I'll invite our speakers to ask each other or respond to your presentations before opening up discussion.
Let's see, I hadn't prepared anything, but I just think that real bodies are so intriguing and interesting compared to photographs or anything like that. It's my desire to be a psychoanalyst, I guess, but I think that what do you say if somebody comes in and they look vastly different because of some kind of plastic surgery or some kind of cosmetic treatment? I don't know I'd be interested to know what the protocol is for that.
Well, the thing is, I don't think there is a protocol because it's not that analysts are exempt from this. I mean, I've been to the New York Psychoanalytic
Oh, gosh.
and seen faces that just, I'm afraid they disturb me because they don't move. So I don't think it's so normalized now that it is almost like washing your face for some people or going to the hairdresser. It's not. And
I'm laughing because I was once walking around the reservoir and I was passed by these two young women jogging and in full body spandex and talking while they were jogging, which really impressed me that they could talk while
they were young.
jogged.
They were young.
They were not.
Oh, no, they were. Oh,
They were not, because then they retired to a park bench and I recognized some rather elderly members of my institute, the New York Psychoanalytic Institute, where I am also a faculty, as well as Columbia. They were extremely well preserved and
Yeah.
But what's interesting to me in North America is very different than if you go to Brazil, because I remember going to Brazil, and we're talking 15 years ago, and a very senior analyst said to me about another woman, "What's the matter with her? She doesn't do the plastic," about one of his colleagues. And it's so normalized and it's part of the health insurance, not as bad as Argentina, where you get one a year in your health insurance, but it's so normalized that it isn't anything, whereas it isn't quite normalized. It certainly isn't normalized in my practice, but I do have somebody who months in was able to say, well, you know, I've had a little bit of help. I mean, I can't stand it when they said I've had work done, because what work? You've been actually tortured here. It isn't work, not torture, but it's something very troubling. And how come we're fighting this we're fighting other aspects of the mutilation of the body in women, but we think this is somehow enhancement when it's somehow it's the horror of not being able to be, really.
Yeah.
A friend of my good friend and colleague Daria Colombo actually has a paper coming out in next month's GAPA, in which she talks rather openly about going through physical changes herself, having gone chemotherapy for breast cancer. And she also talks about a patient who would have lip fillers or silicone, injected into her face, and would come into the session and almost unrecognizable, or looking like she had been, she didn't know what was happening until she says, "Are you okay? You look like you've been hit." And she says, "Oh no, that's just fillers." And she talks about this in a very, very interesting way.
This is one of the things when I used to go to American Psychoanalytic and I didn't have any reason to be there except to spy on what was going on. And I used to see some of these female analysts who were just absolutely too perfect to be true. And I thought, now how can they be psychoanalysts? It just didn't.
Well, they're on the Upper East Side as opposed to a West Side.
I think the thing that's really troubling is we now do have very explicit research that shows that Botox mums are not able to convey to their children, to their developing babies, the full range of emotional expression. It's constrained. And there's some real concern that the emotional development of infants, which is already marked by one's own particular family story and geography and culture, but is now constrained by the actual movement of eyes and cheeks.
I think the theme, or not, maybe not the theme, but the subtextual thread that I'd like to pull out of this here has to do with authenticity. And, is your body really who you are?
I mean, I think that is our problem. I think that is the problematic of late capital. All of that, and that is what's sold around all around the world, is that you produce this body, you can join in to modernity. Except once you're in there, you've got to keep doing something with it. I mean, that's why you've got the kids in Fiji over the toilet bowl at 11 thinking that this is great that they can throw up because they are entering into the world of modernity. They don't see it as passive, they see it as an act of agency. So I don't know about whether authenticity, which is what we like in the session, we like the truths that can emerge and the connections and the thing that's drawn you to it, and keeps us in it. We get authentic in the sessions, but I don't know whether it's possible to get authenticity without bodies.
You're saying that the use of the body as a tool of agency is also authentic in a way.
Well, it's a something.
Mary, your work addresses authenticity in various ways. That's something I've been thinking about. You talk about surfaces and being those surfaces being changed by the act of their representation, or interpreted or distorted, or sometimes even injured. I was very struck by a passage that you wrote about in Syria, the portal, showing that you have a photograph of a beautiful ancient stone portal that had been sort of destroyed by machine gun bullets, but exposing the ancient golden patina to the raw whiteness underneath, a kind of inversion of what we're talking about. But I see that
beautiful but problematic, right?
Beautiful but problematic, and I see that theme throughout your work.
Oh, thank you for understanding that. That's great.
Even in the Orientalist images of ruins, how the understanding of what is in front of you is distorted by the view of the colonialist photographer who is there to sort of look for that image.
Absolutely,
It's so interesting how you understand that in things that we think about today in terms of how our bodies are seen, how they're represented, and how that impacts us. What that you can move between different eras and different ways of understanding that. You also, I remember there is this one passage where you talk about a marble head of a woman, very, very beautiful, but that had been treated with acid to clean it, and the result is that it's so white that you can't distinguish the features.
Exactly.
So
thank you for reading my work so attentively, Adele. That's very nice of you.
It's my job. Would hope. And as I mentioned to Susie before the talk, I think that the one of the interesting things that unites you is that you are so concerned with the impact of representation. And we're flooded with representations. We're flooded with our own selfies. I mean, not all of us. I'm sort of I've been vaccinated against taking selfies, but I don't have that gene, I think, or I missed it. But we're constantly being confronted with images. You're tagged in a photograph. You can't.
Well, that makes me think of Otto Rank saying that one of the most uncanny things that can happen to a person is catching sight of themselves in a mirror reflection there. What's that? You know what I mean? So
now we can't avoid it. We can't avoid it.
Yeah,
but what are we seeing when we're seeing that? That's the thing. If that's the thing that none of us are exempt from seeing ourselves within the history of imagery and within visual culture. So and we fail. I mean, I think that's what I understand and I've watched people taking selfies of themselves, and I'm absolutely delighted when they take these sort of buffoonish photos of themselves as opposed to the sculpted photos of themselves, because I think it lets us know that they know that the whole thing is a pose. I mean, lots of youngsters are doing that. They go, they do that face, but then they also do some other face, which shows that they actually are having a good time and they don't care.
Mhm.
Which I don't think is true, but it is true in that moment that they've allowed themselves that.
Yeah.
So maybe tattooing then, we were talking about tattoos at dinner. Maybe tattooing is a way of trying to control the way that one is seen, in a sense.
Well, it's your personal calling card, isn't it? Because your body is no longer so personal because it has to conform. So maybe what you're saying is that by enriching your body with a tattoo, which we might find difficult because of generationally we find it difficult, that it is a way of being incredibly expressive.
Well, I have this one photograph that I've been working with. I think I sent it
Yeah,
on to you.
it's
too.
fantastic.
It's well, it's a woman who was tattooed by that same tattoo artist, Tom Riley. And he was really unbelievable. He could do anything on skin, you know. And she's got a mask on her face so that you can't see her features, not even her eyes. She has slits around her eyes, but it's very spooky in a certain way. But then her arms are tattooed with these primitive animals. And so I've been working on that for not working on it, just looking at it for a long time. I'm trying to figure out.
And
That's work too.
Well,
tell us.
I don't know. I think just what's on her what's on her outside is what's on her inside.
But the question is, did she make the choice for those?
Oh, yeah.
She
I
did.
I believe so, yeah.
And
Yeah, I think that she employed
the
guy to do it.
the Clara Ward's tattooed eyes, they almost look like a mask.
Yeah, they look like a raccoon
Well, like a raccoon, but
mask.
Yeah,
Yeah, they look like
yeah.
a mask. They are a mask in a certain way.
yeah.
Now, I don't know to what extent I don't know to what extent those eyes were tattooed. I really don't, you know, there's no way of figuring it out, but they certainly, that other photograph that I've been obsessing over. Yeah, she, and then all sorts of women from the upper bourgeoisie, like Winston Churchill's mother had tattoos, and all these unexpected people had tattoos, but none so weird as the one I have that photograph of where she's wearing a piece of material on her face.
That's really interesting that it comes in that class, right? Because by the time I'm a kid, it's in England, an entirely working class phenomenon.
Mhm. Yeah,
And it's a working class marker.
well, I don't know about this one photograph I have, which I did show to Susie. I think that was labeled where I found it as just as a prominent woman of German origins. So I'm worried about whether she was Viennese or not. I don't know.
Any questions or comments? Responses?
Well, I thought the photographs, the word that came to mind looking at the photographs of Clara was prudish. I mean, yeah, she's an exhibitionist, but you know, she completely covers up.
Yeah,
It struck me that as very prudish. And at that time, they were making postcards, weren't they, of prude nudes?
oh, yes, of course.
What kind of person would buy a faux nude when they could get a beautiful, ravishing, sexy true nude?
I think because, well, I don't really know how to answer that question, but I think that the faux nudes had this compression of the flesh, and they were so artificial that that's what made them interesting.
It's the uncanny quality, right?
It's somewhat uncanny. I mean, it's one thing to see, like I showed you that photograph of Mariette by the great Nadar.
Yeah.
And that's much more, she's vulnerable looking, and she too was a personality, but not like, but Clara Ward was just, you know, so narcissistic that she had, I don't know, I think that the body stocking increased the narcissism somehow of what these women were photographing.
And she was also a famous personality, right?
No, she was famous for being famous. She was famous for doing the things that we're talking about, you know.
Uh-huh.
She didn't have any real true fame except for the fact that she was rich and she,
But would her
Married.
notoriety would have added to the appeal, perhaps?
yeah, I think so, because there were so many postcards made of her. You know,
Question about that, like, so in today's world, when people see media, you know, you look at something, people try to emulate it, right? Was it the same sort of thing back then, when people looking at these photos and like, how do I emulate this, how do I become this, that thing like that?
well, maybe as an ideal, but not as, I don't think people wanted to actually imitate Clara Ward, because who could afford to? I mean, like Susie was telling us, most people were just working themselves to death at that time, as usual in society, right? So not too many people can fool around with body stockings or anything like that. So I think she did set off a trend in photography. There are these women that are in body stockings, but basically, I don't think people did their grocery shopping that way or anything like that.
There are even photographs of men on there in body stockings. Or am I imagining it? Kind of strong men in the circus.
Yeah, they had, there are, yeah, there are. Mhm.
Well, if there are no other comments or questions, we should probably call it a day.
Thanks, Adele.
I want to thank Mary and Susie for coming and a long way.
Introducing
me to this
I was
because
telling Adele, Susie, that I never thought when back in the 70s, when I was reading her work for the first time and being blown away by it, that I would ever meet this person in person. It's just like unbelievable to me.
that's so sweet. Thank you.